So do you think there's a dishonesty there, or do you think that is what they really believe? But it's still confusing me. Why do you need to come to Luton and Birmingham to make that point? You can make that point against a specific group or individuals who may have those divisive opinions, who do make inflammatory comments. We can't deny that that happens. But why then feel the need to come and bring that to a whole city, as if implying that all the Muslims in that place somehow hold those views?
Well, indeed, and I would add to that it's oftentimes counterproductive, because these things descend into violence. There's a lot of alcohol. But again, I'm very, very concerned. Not to say that everybody who might go along to one of these things is a racist or has anti-Muslim feelings. They might very well be legitimate. I would merely just suggest to that rank and file, this is not the best vehicle for protesting this. And let me just perhaps very clearly address why I think that is. Because right at the heart, through Tommy Robinson's statements, through the hierarchy of the English Defence League, we really see something that merges into racism, it merges into real prejudice. And so, if I may, this is a quotation from only 2 months ago at the Tower Hamlets protest on the 3rd of September 2011, and where Yaxi Lenin says, quote, "Every single Muslim watching this on YouTube on 7/7, you got away with the killing and maiming of British citizens. You got away with it. You had better understand that we built a network from one end of this country to the other end, and we will not tolerate it, and the Islamic community will feel the full force of the English Defence League if we ever see any of our citizens killed, maimed, or hurt on British soil ever again." Now, again, the collapsing between the Muslim community in Britain and Europe, perhaps even globally, into the idea that all Muslims have some propensity towards violence or extremism is very, very dangerous, and I think very prejudicial. It's that which I think really needs to be responded to in the strongest terms.
Well, Lord Glassman, if I can come to you on that in your response to that, because that, I think many of our viewers watching and listening to this debate would very much sympathise with what Matthew has just said there, as in, why should all Muslims be blamed? We understand there's a sensitivity, we understand that clarity, has to keep being made. But when people come out with these kind of statements associating all Muslims constantly as well, surely that is not the positive way forward, and that is actually poisoning people against a whole community.
Oh, it's completely so. And there's no question that that's horrible, and that the thrust of what they're saying.
How should policymakers respond to that? Should that be pandered to, or should that be robustly challenged?
Well, I think we shouldn't give. My only reservation with Demos is that they're still targeting towards policymakers. What's wonderful about this is we're talking to the people. I think it's how the people respond, and this is Chanel, where we've got to decide, make some political decisions. Are we endlessly going to ban them? Are we just going to ban these marches every time they turn up? Or are we going to build a movement, a real political democracy movement? I'm very inspired by what went on in Libya. The identification of Islam with democracy, with liberty.
Well, that's the whole of the Arab Spring, actually.
The Arab Spring.
Tunisia, Egypt.
So I think this Arab Spring is a really hugely important moment for us and our country, where I think what I would love to see is really strong engagement by Muslims in a
would you encourage the UAF as well as the anti-EDL protests, people coming out in the streets saying, not in our name, we are united, we are not going to be divided?
I would suggest that the EDL aren't terribly important. I think it's much more important. It shouldn't be exclusively an anti-EDL protest. I think a really positive statement of what Islam can bring. I think it's got a wonderful message of economic justice. There's a huge problem with debt. An anti-usury it's a campaign we've worked on to bring an interest rate cap, issues of living wage, issues of family housing, issues of democratic renewal. I think that what I would long to see is the Muslim community as part of a wide English renewal of our democratic tradition, where it's not the case that there's an opposition between English democracy and Islam, where Islam is at the very vanguard of promoting and defending democracy.
Well, of course, those are the very issues that many mainstream Muslim organisations will say.
And I'm just encouraged. That's
what they embrace.
That's what I'm about. That's what this is about.
That's what they
absolutely.
promote.
And what we mustn't do under any circumstances is get locked into a polarising battle with the EDL. We've got to go much broader, much wider, and marginalise them by building a common life between Muslims and non-Muslims, immigrants and locals. This is the way forward, and I've got to acknowledge the wonderful work that I've done over 10 years with the East London Mosque, with the Muslim Cultural Centre, where we've precisely engaged with the politics of the common good. So you can't have a politics of the common good that excludes people. You've got to bring them in, and it's to break the power of the EDL by building up a common democratic agenda in which I want to see Islam have a very important voice.
Well, before I just come to Sharon to give us some examples of those kinds of projects, we can just press you one more time in terms of course, it's tempting for politicians when they see some support increase for a certain group, in this case we're talking about the EDL, and say, well, in order to not lose that electoral possible base, we must either stay quiet or look like we're addressing their concerns. And in that case, we must adopt a certain rhetoric, a certain tone in what we say.
Yeah.
Do you think that there has been a danger in that? We've seen multiculturalism being bashed. We've seen language around immigration become quite inflammatory and emotional. Do you think there has been that temptation, and do you think we need to address that?
That would be an ugly politics and not the right way. But what we've certainly got to recognise that we've lost is this energy of a politics of the common good. So I think we do have to move beyond multiculturalism as a legal rights-based thing towards a common life together in the cities to pursue the good of the city, and to have Muslims and non-Muslims actively engaged together in the pursuit of that. That's the agenda. So I think.
But as part of that, would you recognise that you need to also say, no, we will not tolerate prejudice, and if it comes in this form, we will isolate. Yeah,
and the best way, clearly and definitely. But that's not just the isolation is not the solution. The solution is a generation of a common politics in which, once again, I want to see Islam play a really active and full role in promoting the good of the country. This is the vital thing that we've got to get to. There's lots of interfaith work, there's lots of good work, but we've got to get really stuck into issues of economic injustice, of housing, of debt.
Well, Sharon, you've been nodding there. So Muslims are not doing enough. We need to do more for the common good. What would be your response?
I think if I can just make a couple of points on what was discussed earlier on and so forth regarding the EDL and their coming into certain areas and making themselves be seen and felt. What happens as a result of that is you have a lot of communities who live often in fear. Even though Matthew earlier on talked about flash mobs and so forth, it's these flash mobs that create this fear of the fact that the community is going to be decimated. The fact that if we're not in a position to be able to challenge some of this at an early stage, and that in the Demos report it refers to the fact that perhaps there's overestimation and perhaps policing resources shouldn't necessarily be directed in that particular way. I would disagree with that, in that those flash mobs that come along and actually cause this damage and so forth, they do need to be challenged very robustly, and we use our justice system and our policing authorities to be able to work with them in order to ensure that the communities do not live in fear. And that's one of the key things that we want to achieve, working with other partners to ensure that the communities that live around us are not living in fear. It's not just the Muslim community, everybody that is affected by this.
Well, it brings the whole city centre to a standstill. When I can speak from Birmingham, just recently they came down, and the text messages go around, the email goes around. This time the City Council had a proactive response, and all the parties came together to give a message of unity and solidarity, but that has not always been the case.
No, and I think it's really important that whenever these these threats of demonstrations and so forth are thrown upon us, that the communities need to come together and actually show the fact that there is a lot of commonality, not what just the EDL are coming along to actually put a wedge, saying that you're different from you and you're different from you. But no, we're working towards the common good of things. At the mosque, we've been providing a service for 100 years. Our objective is around community cohesion, it's around economic regeneration, it's around social welfare, education, everything that you and I would, and the whole society at large, will take as important priorities for us to actually keep working towards, to actually make better citizens out of the people that live around us, and not be thrown into fear because one or two people do not like the ideology, or they have a particular ideology against a particular strand of Islam.
If I can just come back to Matthew, who's been patiently waiting on the phone. Do you think there may be a silver lining here, that whilst there may be exaggerations and repetition of very prejudicial type statements, actually communities are coming together to stand together, and perhaps something positive may come of this, because there are choices here. People don't have to just go down.
But it comes at a cost, Selma, as well. I mean, I take the point that the EDL are not about to seize power in this country, but, you know, the homecoming demonstrations at Luton famously this year cost the local police virtually their entire annual budget to police that one day. And I absolutely agree that, you know, we can say the EDL isn't such a threat, but then again, if you're living in fear of the EDL or you have for example, a flash mob demonstration at your doorstep, that might not sound very realistic to you. So my suggestions would be twofold, if I could, and I absolutely agree with the politics and the points that you made there as well. But I would suggest that there are long-term situations and issues that we need to address, and short-term ones, both regarding the EDL. There are issues of socioeconomic prosperity in the Muslim community, questions of integrating places better, like Oldham or Bradford. There are these questions about housing. All of these things are long-term issues, and I think it's right that we talk about them. But let's not have these occlude the short-term issues, like the quotation I read out. I believe that's an incitement to racial or religious hatred. That's criminality. That's not a question of a long-term solution. So I think that there are some short-term solutions, at the very least, about tidying up some of the criminality that we see at EDL demonstrations and some of the incitements and the more extraordinary comments on the EDL Facebook page and so forth that should be addressed as a matter of urgency, because whether it's targeting Muslims, Jews, it doesn't really matter who it is, whether it's targeting somebody in Britain through incitement to racial or religious hatred, that's illegal.
But can you understand why it may be challenging for, quote, mainstream politicians? On the one hand, we are living in the era of a war on terror where other countries are being attacked, where there is this very real concern around Islamic extremism. People have been blown up, people have been killed. So there's a fear factor within the whole of the country on the one hand, and politicians' rhetoric reflects that. And so to be seen to be defending the Muslim community seems to be quite an unpopular choice. So when a group like the EDL comes along, it seems politicians are loud on one issue, but not so loud on the other. I can see Lord Glassmore to come in. If I could just let Matthew just finish there, and I'll come back to you.
Yeah, just very briefly, and perhaps some of your viewers won't necessarily agree with my position on this. I think it's not about the Muslim community per se. The EDL are very much trying to make it about the Muslim community. I think when you need to reject that and say it doesn't matter whether it's right-wing jihadi Islamist violence, the 98% of people of goodwill in this country reject violent extremism wherever it comes from, whatever its background, ethnicity, ideology, and so forth. And that's where I think we can find our strength in standing up to groups that would break up community cohesion and break up the process of integration in post-war Britain. So I'm hopeful about that, is that we can find our strength in our numbers and the rejection of extremists of whatever stripe wherever we find them.
But unfortunately, fear breeds fear, and where there was truth at the start, once it starts getting a certain momentum, it's very hard to pull back. So in terms of what can be done with that, I mean, you've been monitoring what they've been saying. Do you think it is simply about a genuine concern, or do you think they do go around inflaming the situation?
I think there's a certain amount of inflammation, and I take up the point about the criminality. It's no coincidence that Tommy Robinson, aka Stephen Yaxley Lennon, has a string of convictions now and got away quite lightly in court the other day over a violent act. He headbutted an ex-soldier in Blackburn and he got a suspended sentence for him. And I think that it's important to distinguish that the English Defence League do not represent mainstream English people. I think that's a very, very important distinction to make. They certainly don't speak to me as an English person. They don't represent my particular view as an English person. And I think they are deliberately provocative and deliberately divisive. Why do they call their individual groupings divisions? Is there? I think there's a certain clue in there.
And of course, given the history of the Jewish community in Europe, I mean, people can say, look, we've had the experience of demonisation. It starts with words.
Yeah.
Again, a time of recession, depression, where there's financial pressures. It's very, very easy to start to begin scapegoating a community. Do you see any echoes of that with what's happening now? We have an international recession. We see real concern, real instability for many people, worrying about their houses, worrying about their jobs. Do you think this is a convenient distraction?